In this video we are going to be fitting the under bonnet insulation on this 1975 Mercedes 280 SL. The under bonnet insulation is a panel of foam that fits in here, and there is a separate panel of foam that fits in the lower section here. In order to fit the lower section of foam, you're going to need to disconnect the both nozzles, one on this side and one on this side, because the section of foam that goes in here has two cutouts. The under bonnet insulation is held on with high temperature spray adhesive, something like this Trimfix 120. If you have the bonnet off your car, it is very easy to get the Trimfix in all of these sections here, like so. But of course most people won't have the bonnet off the car, and we're going to be attempting to fit the under bonnet insulation with the bonnet in situ. You can cancel your yoga lessons because you're going to be doing some serious back bends in order to fit that under bonnet insulation with the bonnet in situ. Now the first thing you've got to do is make sure that you've covered and masked off all the engine bay and any bits of paintwork that you don't want to get glue on. The second thing you need to do is mask up the little nozzles here for the windscreen wiper washers, and I'm also going to mask up this here. Now what you should ideally do is undo the two clips here and lift the bonnet up, and so you can spray completely horizontally, but I'm not going to do that. I'm doing this the lazy way. We've bought the under bonnet insulation kit from the SL shop. Costs about £90. It comes with two separate pieces, one piece here for the very rear section and two cans of Trimfix. This is the high temperature version of the Trimfix, and then it'll come with one big piece of insulation here. Now I must admit that I am a little bit disappointed in the quality of this insulation. It is not what we've bought previously from the SL shop. This is much thinner, almost like a sponge material, whereas the genuine Mercedes underbonnet insulation, which is obviously considerably more expensive, is a much thicker, more durable material. So we just have to see how we get on with this over the years. The SL shop do actually sell two versions of the underbonnet insulation, and I suspect the more expensive version is what we've been used to using in the past, and the cheaper version is what comes in the kit. And it just goes to show or illustrate that you do get what you pay for when it comes to Mercedes parts. When you're using Trimfix for gluing either carpet or underbonnet insulation, you need to put a thin layer of glue on both sides of what you're gluing. So we're going to be putting glue on the underside of that, which is the easy bit, and then we're going to attempt to be putting glue on the underside of here, right up in there, which is the slightly trickier bit, especially if you're not going to take the hinges off the bonnet and lift it all the way up. The way I'm going to be doing this is basically coming in here with the can like that to do that edge that you can't see, and then standing back a little bit to do that lower edge. We've sprayed the underside of the bonnet, we've sprayed this now, and this is a contact adhesive, and you need to be careful because once you put it on you don't want to break that bond. Now you'll notice here there are little cutouts, and these little cutouts correspond to these metal cutouts here. So we're going to try and start in the middle and work towards the edges. When you come to do the main bonnet section, make sure you've got all the edges masked off to the best of your ability, unless you are very, very accurate with the glue. And my advice would be to open the second can of Trimfix. Obviously make sure it's shaken up and use that, because you're going to basically be spraying glue upside down or at an angle, and the fuller the can, the more even the spray. Use nice even strokes and make sure you overlap, and then give an extra little blast to the edges as well. And once you've sprayed, take all the masking tape off now before you stick the insulation on. Don't forget to take off the masking tape from here, otherwise it will stick on and get really hard to do later. Make sure you spray the right side. We're spraying the shiny side with glue. Once you're confident you've lined it up in the right orientation, we're going to start at the back and then in the middle and work our way out towards the edges. One thing that is a very good idea, which I didn't mention, is there's a little nick out the center of here, is to measure exactly the center of here, and at the front as well. There's another little nick here, just so you get that exactly aligned. There we go, we got that insulation in. I wouldn't describe it as a perfect job, but it looks an awful lot better than it did before. Now that we've got the under bonnet insulation in, the next thing to do is to sort out the windscreen wiper washer lines and also the pump and the electrics. Now, this windscreen wiper washer line, unfortunately ours got cut or was missing from this car, so we've had to order some new line. If you go along to Mercedes and give the part number for this line, you'll end up with black line. So if you want to keep it original, you can go along to the SL shop and buy this by the meter. Just arrived in the post is 5 meters of windscreen wiper hose from the SL shop. This is the part number here, and I believe that comes from a Chinese company. It's probably substantially cheaper to buy that direct than it is via the SL shop. This basically replaces this hose. It's slightly thicker, but it has the same internal diameter. So let's have a go at fitting this. Now, the first thing we're going to do is just use a little bit of soft hose to attach these two together, so when I pull them through this gap here, I don't have to mess about trying to thread this through. Once you've threaded that hose through, it's just a matter of clipping it in here. These are the clamps or clips that hold on the windscreen wiper washer hose to the hood or bonnet. And this just pushes straight onto the bottom of the nozzle here. We've just had our bonnet repainted, and these are not slotted in correctly. They should just be a push fit. Push it in at 90 degrees to the direction you want it to squirt, and then twist it round. But when your bonnet's been painted, this may well be thicker. So rather than chipping the paint, we're just going to put a dab of grease in there to help it in. The next thing we have to do is cut a section of this hose that connects into here. And what we've done is we've just marked with marker pen where it exits here, so we get the right length of hose, and then we're going to be able to clip this in. If you cut this too short, there's no going back. If you cut it too long, you can always trim a bit off if you need to. One end of this hose slots into there. This fitting here goes onto the end of the nozzle, and then we'll cut another length of hose from here to the pump. Now, this hose, when it's new, is quite flexible, and you should just be able to twist that on. What you don't want to do is break this fitting here, so what I'm going to do is just put a dab of silicone grease on there to help it. That's on nice and tightly. Now we just need to cut another piece of hose that runs along here all the way to the pump that lives down here. Don't forget this clip here, and then that routes nicely down there. We've got a nice little bit flexible hose here, so that's not going to catch. You just need to be careful when you're routing this, that you route it under one of these cable ties here, and that should probably be routed behind like that. So we can now do this cable tie up, and that will keep that nice and firm. And once again, there's another cable tie in here that needs to be routed under that cable tie, and then simply down to the pump down here. On this style of pump here, the outlet to the nozzles is the tube or the outlet closest to the positive sign, and the tube closest to the negative sign goes to your windscreen wiper washer reservoir. We got that windscreen wiper washer hose in there without any problems, using the correct clips, all routed nicely. We ended up with about 2 meters left over, bearing in mind that this car has no headlight windscreen washers, so therefore we probably didn't need 5 meters. We just need to see now whether this pump and foot switch actually work. I think this wire here is the plug, or I think this plug here is what we need to plug into the motor. It's not plugged in at the moment. On the earlier Mercedes R107s, up until about 1975, maybe early 1976, the windscreen wiper washer pump was controlled by a foot switch as opposed to the indicator stalk. So on the later SLs, to operate the windscreen wiper pump, you would push this in here, but that doesn't work on the earlier SLs. On the earlier SLs, the windscreen wiper washer pump is operated by this switch here, and when you push that down and keep that pushed down, the pump will operate, and when you take your foot off that, the pump will stop operating. And that pump will only operate when the ignition key is 2 clicks. So the engine doesn't have to be on, but the key needs to be over 2 clicks, and then that pump will have power to it. Now, these days, most people tend to use their Mercedes on sunny days, and hence this switch doesn't get a lot of use. And what happens is these switches, which are common to many Mercedes, not just the R107, they tend to stick down, and also the contacts within this switch tend to get gummed up, so that therefore you're no longer making good contact and this switch no longer works. Unfortunately, these switches are crimped shut at the factory, so if your switch has stopped working, you've got 2 choices. You can either go along to somewhere like the SL shop and buy a new switch if you're made of money, or you can attempt to fix the switch yourself. I'm going to show you how to open this switch up carefully and clean all the contacts and lubricate all the rollers and runners to get your switch working again. This switch is crimped shut at the factory around the edges. There's 2 crimps on each edge, and you might not need to drill out all of the crimps, and you'll also notice it's keyed here, so once you take the switch out, you should always know which way round it goes in. The way we've got those crimps out is to use a spring-loaded hole punch against the crimp just to put a small indentation in, and then we've started with a very small sharp drill bit. These are 1mm drills here, and then very carefully step that up to 3mm drills. And if you're careful and you don't end up drilling out too much of the plastic, what you'll find is you can just get a set of pliers on here and just pull this out like so. Now, when you pull it out, be careful because there are a few springs and rollers in here and you don't want to go losing anything. Once you've taken this out, if you turn it round, you will see that there is a metal slider here, and when you depress your foot on that switch, this slider slides up and connects all of these 3 copper fittings here. And the first thing that can happen is these copper fittings here can get corroded or gummed up, and that's exactly what the situation was with this switch. So we've just used a little Dremel tool to tidy those up. You could also use emery paper. The other thing to note is there are 2 plastic fittings on either side of here that slot into here, and they are different. This one is high on that side and this one is high on that side, so make a note of that. The way this metal plate sits in is like that, and you should clean those silver tips as well, just with a little bit of emery paper. There is a spring here, so that metal clip there is pushed firmly against this. Now this whole section comes out here. Be careful because these 2 rollers will spring out when you take this out, and these rollers here often get gummed up. You should just lubricate them with a little bit of grease or silicone lube. If the problem with your switch is that it's sticking, what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to get lubrication, either grease or silicone lubrication on this piece here, inside there, and also like on the sides there, and also on these sides here as well. And before you put this back together, what you should do is make sure you clean out any of this corrosion and gunk so that little bits and pieces can't fall in the mechanism and cause it to stick. Once you're happy that you've cleaned everything, you just need to put a dab of super glue around the edges here, and then just put this back on, remembering which way round it goes. As I say, there is a key just there. Just push it firmly shut, and then you should be good to go for another 50 years. when you've put it back together, just test that you have got continuity between these two pins here when you push the switch down, which you have, and between these two pins here, which we have as well. So this is ready to go back in the car. And now for the moment of truth, we're just going to turn the ignition on, put a foot on the switch and see if we actually get this pump working. Well, the good news is that the electrics now work and the switch works. The bad news is that this pump doesn't seem to pump, so I'll take it home and just test it properly. I've taken this pump home and verified that it does actually pump, although it's not a particularly strong pump and it's very noisy. The only problem is that the new pumps they make, which are only about £20, have flat terminals and not round terminals like that. So as yet, I'm undecided whether to source a decent second-hand pump or just to modify the plug. We're making good progress, albeit slow progress on this car. In the next video, I'm hoping to get onto the doors, which is a major task. We need to align the door, then we need to align the window to the soft top, then we need to add the door handles, the door cards, all the chrome and bright work and the mirrors, and then we should be almost ready to get onto the underside of this car, the suspension and all the lines, brake lines and fuel lines, etc.